It's 7 o'clock, time for our regularly scheduled council meeting. Mike?
Collier-Wise.
Here.
Erickson. Holland.
Here.
Humphrey.
Here.
Mines.
Here.
Price.
Here.
Sorensen.
Here.
Ward.
Here.
Mayor Powell.
Here.
Student Representative Paulson.
Here.
Would everyone please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Item 3 are minutes. We have minutes from January 2nd, 2018 regular meeting and special meeting. I move approval. A motion to second to approve both sets of meetings. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Thank you. Adoption agenda. John or Mike, any changes, additions, corrections? Okay.
Move approval.
A motion and second to approve the agenda as printed. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Under visitors to be heard, addressing the council, persons addressing the council shall use the microphone at the podium. Please raise your hand to be recognized, go to the podium, and state your name and address. For items that are not on the agenda, members of the public may speak under visitors to be heard on any topic not on the agenda. Remarks are limited to 5 minutes and no decision will be made at this time. For agenda items, public testimony will be taken at the beginning of each agenda item, after the subject has been announced by the mayor and explained by staff. Any citizen who wishes may speak one time for 5 minutes on each agenda item. Public testimony will then be closed and the topic will be given to the governing body for possible action. At this point, only city council members and staff may discuss the current agenda item unless a council member moves to allow another person to speak and there is unanimous consent from the council. Questions from council members, however, may be directed to staff or a member of the public through the presiding officer at any time. At this point, is there anyone in the audience that wishes to speak on any topic that is not on the agenda? Anybody in the audience? Council, anyone on the council have anything they wish to mention at this point that's not on the agenda? Okay, we'll move on then to public hearings. Item A, first reading of ordinance 1368 to rezone Lot 3 and the east 4 feet of Lot 5, except the south 320 feet in Block 1, Johnson's addition to the City of Vermillion, Clay County, South Dakota, from GB General Business District to the Dakota Commons Planned Development District, property on the west side of North Dakota Street, south of Alumni Street. And there he is, Jake.
Well, John asked me to get both of my items done in 5 minutes, so I think
Okay.
I might disappoint him, but it won't be the last time this week.
We can turn the mic off.
So just to start out, this is a planned development district, so I'm just going to briefly review how a planned development district works in general. It's been a few years since we've had one of those, and then go through in the case of Dakota Commons here. So the process of creating a planned development district is pretty similar to a rezone, except the applicant is rezoning it to a zoning district that doesn't currently exist. And they get to kind of create their own wish list of what they'd like it to be. And this allows us to be a little bit more flexible and creative with the land that we use, and it doesn't have to be in one of our pre-established categories. But the flip side of that is we do have to offer more chances for public input because we're doing something that doesn't exist currently. So it's the same sort of method as a rezone. When we have a property in question, we have to receive written consent from 45% of the aggregate owners with an area of 250 feet around the property. So we just draw a line and write up the petitions, and the applicant has to go out and get those signed just to show that they're aware of what's going on. And then if that happens, the Planning Commission holds a public hearing. We post signs on the property and in the paper, and then Planning Commission gives a recommendation to City Council. City Council holds a public hearing. They do the first reading of the ordinance. If it's approved, it goes on for a second. Assuming it were approved at that point, we'd have a 20-day waiting period after it's published, and then it would become effective. And then that's where an applicant could apply for a building permit. It's important to note City Council may approve with stipulations and conditions the ordinance in question. Just because someone asks for it doesn't mean it's directly what council has to grant. And it's also important to note that, like a rezone, if council rejects a PDD, the land affected cannot be petitioned for rezone for another 6 months. And so the PDD process has two parts to it. What I just described was the first part. That's the initial development plan. So after all of that's done, we're in the final development plan. So this is where more of the review comes in. So just because the PDD ordinance is accepted, if the applicant wants to actually build on that land, they need to go to the Planning Commission for a public hearing, present their final development plan, and at that point, the Planning Commission can approve, deny, or amend the request. And then at that point is really when the building permit can be issued. So going from that portion now to our specific case here with Ordinance 1368 and the Dakota Commons PDD. This fall, staff was approached by a group of developers who are here with us, Mr. Steve Booty, Josh Kruger, Ryan Peedy, wanted to discuss a proposed development on the land that's just west of Dakota and south of Alumni. I think we have a map of it, actually. And the development that they had in mind was one of mixed use with both residential and commercial. Currently, this land is zoned general business, and so you couldn't have a residential use in there. And so staff recommended that the Plan Development District would be their best option for pursuing these plans. So working with JSA engineers and land surveyors, they created an initial development plan draft and also a draft of the Ordinance 1368, kind of listing out what sort of uses would be permitted, different things like height, setback, and parking requirements. So the initial development plan, and you all have this included in your packets, anticipates the creation of a large 4-story apartment building with a commercial business on the ground floor, and additionally, another commercial building on the lot. And then you can see in the ordinance we've provided you the list of all the possible permitted uses that could go on there. One thing that this ordinance does is it changes how we require the minimum number of parking stalls that need to be provided. So just to walk you through that, in a multifamily housing like this one, you have to have, for every bedroom, you need to provide 1 parking stall. So for a 210-bedroom anticipated building, we need 210 parking stalls. The coffee shop, we need 1 spot per 300 square feet, so that's 5 parking stalls. And then the second building on the lot, the 5,000 square foot commercial building, would require 17 parking stalls. So under our regular ordinance, this would be 232 parking stalls. The ordinance that was given to us, the draft, asked for a reduction up to 7% in terms of the parking stalls, provided that every parking stall that was not provided would be replaced with 2 bicycle parking spots. And so in that case, 93% of the parking would be 216 parking stalls, and then to replace those 16 parking stalls that were taken away, we'd have 32 bicycle parking spots. A few other notable things. The general business zone normally has a 45-foot height. In this case, it would be raised up to 60 feet to accommodate this 4-story building. This is similar to Coyote Village. And then just to review, the applicant was required to have 45% of signatures for the Planning Commission to consider this. I checked, and as of today, 80% of the aggregate area owners have signed, so the university and then a number of properties around there. So it's one that the neighboring properties are certainly well aware of and have given their written consent for. So just a little more history. Planning Commission considered Ordinance 1368 at their January 8th meeting. They approved it 7-0. At that meeting, we did have one neighbor express concerns about the height and whether or not that would clash with the neighborhood. And so at this point, council is asked to consider Ordinance 1368 to consider the Dakota Commons PDD. This would allow for a mixed-use development primarily geared towards students in a location adjacent to the university. And it's important to highlight that only the initial development plan is being considered here. So the conceptual plans that are provided to you, that may be what the developer is intending to build, but really all they're held to at this point is that if you approve the ordinance that has these permitted uses and other zoning requirements, that's really what would constrain them. They may plan on building this building, but what's in the ordinance is really what's the most important. Their eventual construction might be different. At this point, administration recommends approval. And as I mentioned, there are representatives for the project here to speak as well. So at this time, I'd be happy to take any questions from me. If you have any about the PDD, which I'm sure you do, the representatives would be best to answer those. So, thank you.
Great.
I assume that I'm always dangerous when I assume, so I'm going to ask. All the rules and zoning regulations apply unless specifically stated otherwise in the proposal. Is that correct?
Yeah, do you have a specific one you're concerned about?
No, I don't. I just want to say, I don't want to say we approve this and all of a sudden we have something come up that was not mentioned. But all the existing rules and regulations apply except the ones noted differently in the plan development. Is that correct?
That's correct, as I understand your question, yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you. That was it.
Tom, please.
Along those same lines, I was wondering that too. This illustrates what it might be, but the final plan would have to be approved, starting with the Planning Commission. And if there was enough disagreement, it would be appealed to the City Council kind of thing, right?
Now, that is for a conditional use permit, that is how it works. I would have to review in the code to see whether an aggrieved party can file an appeal for a final development plan. Off the top of my head, I don't know if that's the case or not.
So this, to your knowledge, doesn't require an exception to an existing ordinance or anything. This is a totally different approach to this, and your memo calls it a novel approach that is more beneficial than we would otherwise think. A specific question I have, and maybe it's for the other gentleman, can you define what a bicycle parking spot is? Because as long as I have a chain and a padlock, I can park just about anywhere.
Yeah, and I think Steve had some...
It states in our work what the bicycle is anchored, that thing is anchored.
I believe Steve had brought up his actual kind of proposed design. So if it's all right with you, for those kind of questions, I might invite Mr. Booty up, if that's fine with all of you, to talk a little more about the project.
Thank you.
Item on this extra sheet that came to us, item 5, Roman numeral 2. Each bicycle parking space shall include a metal anchor which will secure the frame and both wheels in conjunction with a user-supplied lock.
And I hadn't had a chance to look at this handout yet, so thank you.
Responding to the question, Tom. Okay. Any further questions for Jake? Okay, then we'll open it to
what I like to hear.
anybody in the audience that wishes to comment on this. I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry, Steve.
Sorry. So I think I heard you say that there would be no option for a public dissension from this plan at the Planning Commission level?
I would need to review the code, but as I understand it, I believe the wording is that Planning Commission would have the ability to, I believe solely them would be able to approve, deny, or amend, but there very well could be a case of an aggrieved party, but off the top of my head, I don't know if that is the case or not. So we're working on that one right now.
Until that answer might be gotten for us. That's a little concerning to me. Is there any, if, let's say it's not let's say it's not possible, is there a way that we could write something in here that, or would that be interfering with state laws?
Off the top of my head, I don't know if that would be interfering. I'm not sure if we've done that in the past, but that doesn't mean we couldn't add in an exception for future council approval.
John, do you want to comment?
If I may, is the question about the council's ability to review the final development plan? As I understand it, and Jose went to get our code book, the authority to approve the development plans was provided to the Planning Commission, and I'm not even sure if there's an appeal process. That's what we're checking to see that way. I think you would find that in our, I think, 2 meetings we've had with these developers, they're very, I would like to commend them. They put forth more ideas and more plans than what we've seen a lot of other PDDs or planned development districts provide at this point in their process. So I think they've been pretty straightforward about what it is that they would like to do, and whether it was written in there or not, I think they'd be willing to present those to the City Council. The question may be, and I think that's what Jose is researching, is if the ability to accept it or approve it may not be provided to the Council.
And I guess I'm not too worried about final approval, but I am a little bit worried about community input and the ability of the community to, at least appeal it to the City Council if possible. And I agree with you, I'm not opposed to this plan at all. I guess I would have a question for the developers if that's okay.
Well, we're not quite ready because, Kelsey, you have a question? Don't let Jake get away yet.
I was just going to say, and maybe Jim's already on this, but I would assume that even in cases where the council isn't the Board of Appeals for specific decisions, I mean, there's always a track for appeal. It may just not come to us as the Board of Appeal. So there are a lot of things like the conditional use permit where we're explicitly listed as the Board of Appeals, but when we're not, it's not that, I mean, it's not like they don't have any options. It would probably just go a different direction through the courts. So I don't think there wouldn't be a situation, obviously they would have the ability to go to the Planning Commission meeting and give input, and if they were dissatisfied with that decision, even if we weren't the people to hear it. I mean, there's always a way. It just may not be us.
What I would equate it to is right now that's general business. The owner could apply for a building permit to build some permitted use that the neighbors might find that they don't like, but it's the same case where it's provided for in the ordinance, and so there may be means, but we don't have one, appealing to city council and those terms. So you're treating it like it's another zoning district in town.
Okay, we'll let you go. Now, is there anyone in the audience that wishes to speak on the topic? Have anything to say? Is this what's called a pregnant pause? Are we waiting for...
The council has questions.
Oh, okay.
For the developers, if one of you could come forward.
After nobody from the audience.
Good evening. My name is Steve Booty, 1305 East Benson Road, Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I'm the lead of this group. With me I have Ryan Peaty and my son Josh Kruger, both business associates in this venture as well. So what I can't answer, I'm hoping they can. I'll try my best to answer the questions in the best way possible. So with that, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Go ahead, Steve.
I just had one. Thank you all for coming to Vermillion today. I appreciate that. How did you research the market to determine that such a large apartment complex would be viable?
I think that the impetus was probably being a father and putting 3 children through large universities and seeing how students are living in my case, in Iowa State, University of Nebraska, friends' families at University of Minnesota and at the University of Iowa. Schools that are from quite a bit larger, maybe in the case of University of Minnesota, to not that much larger in the case of University of Nebraska. The University of Minnesota has 21 facilities like this, either under construction or already opened. Granted, their facilities are probably 2 or 3 times larger, but they have the same bloodline, amenity-rich, lots of building security, typically furnished, and a really strong sense of community, which it almost becomes dorm-like, where the students become very proud of where they live, and not unlike the dorm life of naming your dorm floor and all of that. So it really is pretty fun to watch. From a cost standpoint, it runs a little bit more than what you would experience in a typical dorm, but it is averaged out over a whole year of a lease, and typically the students lease by the bed, and the rooms can be 2, 3, 4 bedroom. We felt the need was here. Kind of hard to find data to support that. It's just not published the way a community housing study would be done, and I'm sure you guys are familiar with those. But we've been developing, largely in rural areas, apartment buildings for quite some time, and we've had a fair amount of success. So I think the idea of seeing what my children went through in their college years and what I've experienced in the apartment development definitely gave us a pretty good feeling that the demand was here. after it gained some traction and we started to have meetings with different community leaders and particularly administration over at the university, we were reassured that in their opinion, that the demand was definitely there. To provide any data to quantify that's probably a little difficult, but I'm sure we're going to cross that bridge with our bank because I think they will ask for that. So it's a gut feeling more than anything.
And was the university clear with you that the students are tied for 2 years into their campus housing, not one?
Yes.
Okay, good. Just wanted to make sure you had good information.
Yeah. And typically in the other markets that I referenced, the vast majority of the students that move into this style of housing are juniors. It just seems to happen that way in their journey through the system.
Tom?
Thank you. Thanks for being here. I'm curious to know if you've done these sorts of developments before with other campuses and where there's been a need for housing, and are they all fairly close to campus, like this would be as this is proposed right across the street?
The really successful ones are almost always very close to campus.
Okay.
There are a lot of them nationally that are all over a community, and they tend to work from what I can tell, but I think that our comfort level was to be close.
Are there any cases in your experience where they were so popular that you owned this a short period of time until the university bought it?
I'm not aware of any of those.
Okay.
I am aware that they're so popular that in the larger universities, this is a national trend, and there are a half a dozen or more national players that are really, really big at this. And they just don't look at universities this size. In almost all of those cases, those national players will roll them up into groups of 6, 8, 10 units, and they'll end up selling that as a package. So we're seeing a lot of movement in the market of these national companies creating a product, rolling them up, and then selling them to another entity. Why that's prevalent, I don't know. Our history as a developer has been to build, lease up, take care of, and hold. Of all of the apartments we've developed, which are nearing 1,000 units, we haven't sold a single complex.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Further question? Brian?
Thank you for meeting tonight, and also thanks for coming last week to the zoning meeting.
Yeah.
I just have a couple questions for you. First off, I'm assuming that you've done land testing for the wetness of the land, that it can support a 4-story building, and also it's no secret that drainage is an issue in this part of the town, well, all over town, but especially this part of town. Do you have a drainage concept that's already
Oh, yes.
ready to allow?
Most definitely. And of course, that's going to be something that comes up, in my experience, in the PD process or PUD process. That's something that's going to come up heavily in the final development plan. Our civil engineers have been all over that site. They've surveyed it. They've looked at the pipe sizes and the storm sewer. The part of town and the area that you're referring to that's had drainage issues is actually just not very far from there, but just a little bit to the west and maybe a little bit to the north. They've had some issues, and all of that flows to I believe the south, or for sure to the west. This whole lot will flow through a system that's going to the south, and it also is accessing a different sewer main, which is huge and adequate from what it's been described to me. There also will abide by all of the best use practices that your town and all towns abide by. That's I think it's actually a federal mandate. So we'll be retaining all of our own water in a major event, and then that water water will then be released slowly, so through some sort of a control structure. So the impact from stormwater will be less today, or less when this is built than it is today, just by the design of the best management practice. So.
All right, and I guess my other question is jobs, like local jobs, will these be farmed out to local businesses, local trimmers, local floor layers, or do you have your own?
Yeah, no, I'm glad that you asked that question. I think one of the reasons that that we've had the success that we've had, particularly in the rural markets, on our apartment side, is because we are fiercely loyal to the communities we go into. We go out of our way to use local in almost every instance. There are a few things that are difficult to use local, one being drywall, another one being framing. There's just too much manpower required on a project this size. But we're already deep into discussions with a local electrician, a local plumber. It's not uncommon for us to break up the floors into smaller packages so that a 2 or 3 man trim, man or woman, trim crew can do a floor, and then a separate 2, 3, 4 man crew can do the floor below. I think our history is pretty good in that respect. We become part of the community, and we like doing that. So.
That brings up a point I guess I'm curious about. To the east of the dome, southeast, there's a large dorm complex, and we watched with great amazement at the amount of wooden framing that went into that. Is this, you anticipate this to be mostly wood also?
Yes. Yeah, the elevator shafts and the major stair shafts will be wood. There'll probably be a few little steel elements in the commercial sides of it, and it'd be really difficult at this point for me to comment on the commercial building, just because we haven't spent any time on the design for that. But the housing building would be predominantly wood.
I didn't want to start picking at details, but that was a very noticeable thing too. I know people standing at the fire station watching the other place being built.
Yeah.
It's called fuel.
It's kind of fun. Well, in reality, I would point out that this building, just by sheer size and design, needs to be what's called a Type 5 1-hour structure. So it will be fully sprinkled, not residentially sprinkled, which is called a Type 13R. This will be a full sprinkle system, just by the nature of the category that it falls into under the IBC building code. So not only will it be fully sprinkled, including the closets, including the small areas, including the overhangs, including a larger volume of water because of the fact that it's a full 13 system rather than a 13R, but it's also a Type 5 1-hour construction, and that means that every single structural element has to be rated at 1 hour. So you won't see any wood other than the wood that you see in here, which would be the trim elements and those kinds of things. Yes. Yeah, no problem.
Further questions? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
And we'll turn it to the council for deliberation.
Yeah. Side note, this is gorgeous. Beautiful building. So,
thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, do you have a wallpaper person?
Josh has been looking one for a month. He won't show up, so.
Must be the same guy we're dealing with. Rich, did you move?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Second.
We have a motion and second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Thank you very much. Thank you. Item 6B, first reading of ordinance 1366 to amend section 155.
NRC Natural Resource Conservation
but not less than twice the distance of the fall radius of the telecommunications tower of any residentially zoned or used property. Did I get that?
Sounds right to me.
Thank you.
Well, hello again. So what this ordinance deals with, 1366, it's an issue that I'm sure you're all very familiar with now, but just to review, Ordinance 1355 failed on a 4-4 vote at the December 4th meeting. At that time, this issue was referred to the Policies and Procedures Committee, and so when that committee met, they came up with a few problems that summarized what the discussion had been about and then recommended to council their findings, which were approved at this December 18th meeting. So just to kind of go over again what happened at Policies and Procedures Committee, there were kind of 4 basic issues that came up. The first was the need for additional cellular capacity in certain parts of town, and this may not be an issue that's affecting us at the moment, but Verizon and some of the other companies certainly believe it could in the future. And so and again, at this time, it's only impacting Verizon that we know of, but it could be the other companies later. A new tower could accommodate more than one carrier, so this is something in certain parts of town that the committee believed there was a need for. The appearance of a proposed tower, something certainly that those who live near a tower are most concerned about, but the community as a whole. So the committee felt that the appearance and general location, again, should be approved by the city council at a public meeting. Also, the committee discussed how safety concerns of a tower falling had been brought up, and this is something that could be addressed by requiring a distance of twice the engineered fall radius from a residential zone or use, and we'll get into that a little more later. And then the fourth point that came up a few times was health concerns from a telecommunications tower in the forms of radio emissions, and it was discussed how this was preempted at the federal level if this is shown to be our determining factor that could get us into trouble down the line if that's why we reject a tower. The committee also discussed how our current zoning ordinance doesn't allow towers to be placed in the NRC, Natural Resource Conservation District, and so the committee felt like that was something that could be added to give a few more options for tower placement. And so after council received these findings at the December 18th meeting, staff was directed to create a draft ordinance and present it to the Planning Commission. And so that brings us along to Ordinance 1366. And so if I could get the overhead on here, I have a little bit of a map diagram, and this is something council's been provided. And I am not an artist, and this definitely proves it. But just going to walk through a few different cases with you here to show you how this ordinance would work. In many ways, it's similar to Ordinance 1355. So if you follow along with me, this white area here, a tower can only be placed in 4 current districts, 5 with this new ordinance. Those would be general business, central business, heavy industrial, general industrial, and then natural resource conservation. So if we look at this proposed Tower A here, so if you look at this black line, that's 300 feet away from our residential zone or use over here. And so if the tower is more than 300 feet away from residential zone or use, and it's in one of those 5 allowable districts, the applicant for a tower would have to file a petition, but then the Planning Commission would hold a public hearing to consider granting a conditional use permit for the tower. If it were approved, a building permit could be issued for the tower, and an aggrieved party would have 5 working days to file an appeal to the City Council. So this is how our code works now, except for the addition of the NRC district. Now looking at proposed Tower B, currently our ordinance doesn't allow a tower within 300 feet, and that's been the key issue, 300 feet of a residential zone or use. So in this case, the tower's within 300 feet of a residential zone or use, and assuming that it's in one of those 5 zones we covered, the applicant could file a petition for this telecommunications tower. In that petition, the application, we require them to do an engineered fall study, and so taking into account what the Policies and Procedures Committee came up with, staff internally would make sure that it was more than 2 times the fall radius away from residential zone or use, and if it weren't, we would not be allowed to proceed forward. And so that's where the blue line comes into play, and this is a dynamic range, I believe is how Rich described it. So if the engineered fall radius for a tower were 50 feet, it would need to be at least 100 feet away from a residential zone or use. And that's measured to the lot line. And so if that condition were met, the ordinance takes into account a few conditions to notify neighboring property owners within 300 feet. We'd also advertise it as a public hearing. And then City Council would hold a public hearing, consider the design and the general location of the telecommunications tower. If approved, the applicant would still need to go before the Planning Commission to receive a conditional use permit, and if that were granted, a building permit could be issued. So Ordinance 1366 was created and presented to the Planning Commission at their January 8th, 2018 meeting. At this meeting, I believe, I'll do my best to summarize kind of what Planning Commission's thoughts were, but they were very supportive of the ordinance, except for one change. The Planning Commission felt like a telecommunications tower should be treated like other conditional uses. Right now, every conditional use other than the telecommunications tower is considered just by the Planning Commission, and if there is an appeal filed, that goes to the City Council. The Planning Commission felt a little bit like there would be a rubber stamp in the process if Council had to approve a tower site first, and then the Planning Commission were to consider the CUP. They kind of felt like their hands would be tied in that process. An additional point they brought up was that the current CUP process has the City Council acting as the Board of Appeals if an aggrieved party has a problem with it, with the CUP being granted. And so, for example, if City Council were to approve a site and then the Planning Commission were to grant a CUP later, and then an aggrieved party filed an appeal, we're not really sure where that would leave things, because the council would be the ones that granted that in the first place, and it would likely lead to some sort of litigation, would probably be an aggrieved party's course of action. So staff took that into account. That modified version of the ordinance was provided to you as well. It's fairly identical, except it just replaces City Council with Planning Commission and then omits the last sentence of the code change. And so, just to sum up again, City Council can grant an exception for a telecommunications tower within 300 feet of residential zone or use, taking into account the design and location, and then Planning Commission would consider granting a conditional use permit. That's in the first version that you were provided that came out of the committee's discussion. And the second is what Planning Commission passed along. In that case, Planning Commission can allow the exception to the 300-foot rule, and then they would consider and grant a conditional use permit, and then City Council would act as an appeals body. In that case, that way a telecommunications tower would be a conditional use like anything else. So just to conclude here, from staff's position, our current ordinance is overly restrictive, doesn't allow for a tower to be placed south of Cherry Street and north of the Bluff, just because of the proximity to residential uses. And this is the part of town where we most will need a new tower, because that's where most people are located. I certainly understand the concern of any neighbors to a telecommunications tower. It's important to note this ordinance is not at all site-specific. This just allows the discussion to move forward. And we certainly understand that some might be hesitant to live next to a tower. That's why we have in either ordinance a way for the design to be approved. And just a few more additions. Ordinance 1366 would add, again, the NRC district as a zone for a telecommunications tower as a conditional use. And again, through one form or another, this ordinance would allow the city to use a public process to consider or not whether to allow a telecommunications tower within 300 feet of residential zone or use. So we've provided with these two ordinances. Administration feels choosing between these is a policy question best left to the council. And so at this time, we'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. I believe our representative working with Verizon is here as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Typically, we allow people in the audience to come in first. Last meeting,
The last deal, we went asking Jake questions first. If you want to do it that way, that's fine with me. So, I'm sorry? Well, whichever way you folks, the other previous one, we'll go with the audience first. Anyone in the audience wish to comment on this at this point in time? Okay. We'll turn it to the council for our deliberation. So, Rich?
Representative, would you come forward, please?
After all, you made the trip.
Yes.
If he was
Again,
here, they'll-
I'm Kurt Walter for Verizon Wireless from Rochester, Minnesota. Yes.
I previously asked the questions, not of you, but I sent through to John. As far as I know, we haven't gotten a reply back, and that was concerns about the constructed, no matter what tower you've got, does it require always to have a fence around it? I'm trying to make it look as pretty as possible.
Not necessarily, no.
Okay. can the transmitter be moved away from the tower a reasonable distance, not miles, but feet?
Depends on the style.
Okay.
But yes.
I'm
yes.
looking for a flagpole that looks like a flagpole with anything around it, maybe it being 10 feet away. I'm also looking for possibly a monument where nothing around it immediately, so it'd be something that's somewhat attractive, because that opened up more possibilities and less problem with the public.
Yes.
Okay.
If I can speak in what we've done before, if we do a flagpole type, it's restrictive of antennas, how many antennas you can physically fit inside it. That will reduce the amount of additional carriers there are. So each style we talk about will have some pros and some cons to it. A monopole is, or the flagpole, like we've discussed before, there's dozens of them in Sioux Falls. They work really well. Our control equipment can be placed, 30, 40, 50 feet away. If there's a spot in the basement of the building that, if this is an additional structure, let's say we picked City Hall here. We put a flagpole out front. If there's a spot in your basement or a little room in the back, we can put our ground equipment in that, and you wouldn't see anything. Typically, the flagpole type, you might get people trying to climb it. We can put a little picket fence around it or something that helps discourage that. But we don't necessarily, there's no real reason we need a fence around it.
Okay.
So, and then if the other way, if we do a bell tower or an obelisk type things, if we do it right and it's large enough, we can fit our ground equipment inside the base of that.
Good point.
Okay.
So a lot of it depends on what it looks like and where we're putting it.
One
So-
more little question concerning that. A monument, which basically is 4-sided, 6-sided, whatever.
Yep.
Would you allow it to be painted on the first 10 feet, 15 feet?
Would we like, I'm sorry, what?
To paint it. In other words, if we decided to make deco out of the bottom of it, could we do that?
There's a lot of different things we can do about it, yes. If Verizon is the owner of it, maybe, maybe not. There's certain ways around it. Verizon can build the tower, give it to the city. The city would own it, and whatever the costs of typically whatever the costs of Verizon, it's deducted over the rent for the first 5-6 years, whatever it turns out to be, and then the city owns the monument, the structure. They lease it to Verizon, they lease it to whoever else comes. There's many different angles we can do with it. I'm sure there's a way we can work something, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Tom?
In line with that, I guess I'm surprised, is there an FCC rule or regulation about fencing around telecommunications tower, no matter how short it is?
Not that I'm aware of.
You're not aware of it, that a
Not
fence
that
is
I'm aware
required?
of.
Oh, okay.
Typically, it's the municipality anti-climbing type things. So to keep teenagers off from climbing it. I'm not aware of any FCC. We always fence them, but
Thank you.
we've built bell towers that don't have any fencing around it. But you can put a nice looking, wrought iron fence that looks like it fits. It's not like you can do whatever you want. And when I was just thought of this with the painting of the outside, it can be done. If Verizon owns the tower, it'd be corporate, Verizon corporate, to say if they would allow it or not. So, but yeah, it definitely can be done.
Thank you.
Other questions from the council? Well, I think an issue that we have to deal with is which model do we wish to pursue, and that is the one with the planning district making decisions and the city council being then, what would you call it, a appeal process, or if we want the city council to be the design and place holder. So I think that's an issue we have to discuss. Steve?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I wanted to talk about one thing. I don't know, Jim, you might know this, or John, or Jake. I was talking with my friends today, and one of them said that their son was at several high schools around the Omaha area, and every one of them had a cell tower in their school district land. And those are all in the residential district. If we would include school districts, I mean, can we include school district land in the list of possible areas, or because it's in residential, is that not allowed? Or do we have to ask the school board?
John, please.
I think, excuse me, the way that our code was written, it was set up by zoning districts is what we use to determine that. I think if that is something you want to do, we could look at adding language that would say publicly owned land. I would note that even including the National Resource Conservation District, the idea that Policies and Procedures Committee suggested, that does not even make all of our parks eligible for this for cell tower, because some of them are not zoned NRC. Some have single family, different zoning categories they have attached to them. So if that's something the council wants us to look at, additional language, we can certainly do it that way. It's just the model that we use to set up our code, use zoning districts as a determining factor.
Would it be better for us to pass this now if we want to change it, if we pass it? If it would be best for us to consider this now as is, and then if we want to change it to add more areas later, is that easier, or is it?
I think it's the purview of the council. Correct, Jim? I mean, we can, if you want, if one of these is to your liking, you want to adopt that, that's fine. Or we can go in and come up with language that adds additional districts or descriptions of land. It could be done either way. It's really the purview of the council. It would be different for our code to have a use defined by ownership rather than zoning district. Mm-hmm. It's not impossible, not illegal. It's just different than how we have historically done it.
Regardless of where it's built, or regardless of what district it's in, if they build a tower on a certain location, they're going to have to make some kind of agreement, either to purchase the land that the tower is going to be on or lease it from whoever the owner is. So that's something that Verizon's going to have to deal, or any cell tower owner is going to have to deal with. You're going to have to deal with the owner of the property at some point.
But I think the way that this is written right now, that we couldn't build on, that school districts wouldn't be, the high school, for example, is where I'm specifically thinking, that we couldn't build on the high school land because it's an R1 district, right? So it would not be able to be considered. So I'll just go with my overall thoughts on this, and then we can, if anybody wants to talk about school districts anymore, or school land, we can. I think we should pass this. I am more in favor of it going to the Planning Commission first, and then the City Council, so the City Council can be the Board of Appeals. And I think this is a relatively benign compromise that allows more land to be considered for possible construction of a necessary cell tower. And if you are so inclined and you agree with me that the high school land in particular would be an ideal place, then I think I would like to hear if people are interested in adding that as an option onto this ordinance as well.
In my mind, you've suggested two different things, and I'd like to keep them separate. Personally, I'd like to see us move on one of the two options, and the school can be something that we look into later. That's just a personal. Is it too much, Jim, to have?
I think it, because this was a zoning amendment, it had to be noticed in the paper, and I think you'd be adding into it a component that's beyond, outside the scope of the notice.
That's what I thought. Is that okay, Steve? You understand? Steve, were you making a motion?
No, I was not. I wanted to hear some discussion first.
Well, we can always have the discussion.
I would make the motion exactly as you said, that we take a plan B with the planning commission, look at it first, they can go into all the rest of the procedures they have, and allow us to try to
So that, you make that motion?
I make that motion.
Is Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is the motion understood by the council? Is there further discussion?
I'm very much in favor of pursuing information about school districts because I'm aware of others. Right. And I understand it's not part of the motion right now, but unless enough people vote no and send it back and ask that the school district idea be put back in it. In other words, an amended motion or a substitute motion. But I just wanted to state that I am also aware of a lot of school districts that have towers. They also get the lease money. So
okay, again, I understand, Tom, what you're saying, but that's a separate issue from what our motion and a second is. Is there further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, we'll try a voice vote. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Thank you. Now, Tom, I would like to have us ask the question about having the city or some entity look into the possibility of school property with the understanding that the school would have to deal with the people as far as leasing and kind of like what we do with leasing some of our property out by the armory and that sort of thing. Elsie?
I think it would be helpful, besides just the schools, I mean, what you mentioned about some of our parks and some of our other public land, golf course, we had a number of things that came up that seemed like they might be good possibilities maybe for not just cell towers, but a number of things that don't necessarily conform to residential uses. So maybe this could be a better or a bigger question about kind of these public land uses and how they fit in and how we might be able to, I don't know, find a new and novel way to look at them when we're considering things like this in the future.
Thank you. Okay, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry.
This question to either John or you, is this something that would be appropriate to go to the Policy and Procedure Board for research and so forth?
Yeah, if I may.
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, certainly as a staff put together some ideas and research those and bring those to the policies and procedures for discussion, I think.
Okay. All right, then let's move on. We have no old business, so we'll turn to new business. Item 8A, request to close Court Street on February 24th, 2018 from Kidder Street North to the alley between Main Street and Kidder Street from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. for the Polar Plunge. And Addison, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Law Enforcement Torch Run and Special Olympics of South Dakota are requesting the closing of Court Street from the corner of Kidder Street north to the alleyway between Kidder Street and Main Street on Saturday, February 24th, 2008, from 11 o'clock a.m. to 6 o'clock p.m. for the Polar Plunge event. For those of you who don't know, the Polar Plunge is an annual fundraising event for the Special Olympics. It was initially held in Vermillion High School parking lot. In 2015 and 2016, the event was held on the 1/2 block of Kidder Street, immediately west of Court Street. And last year, the event was moved to the 1/2 block of Court Street, immediately north of Kidder Street. Therefore, this 2018 street closing request is for the same location as was utilized last year in 2017. I also have a map of the proposed closing here for reference as well. If that's, yeah, there we go. All right. John Cole, representing the Law Enforcement Torch Run, has completed the request of the street closure for the event to be held with registration beginning at 2 o'clock p.m. on February 24th. The request to close Court Street is for 3 hours before the event to allow for setup, 1 hour for the event itself, which starts at 3 o'clock p.m., and for 2 hours after the event to allow for teardown. Mr. Cole has indicated that they will be using a sound system, but do not expect to exceed sound levels, as the event is during the day, and they have previously used sound systems in previous years and not gotten a sound permit as well. The letter also indicates that they have talked to the local businesses about the street closing request, and parking access to the post office will be allowed until noon. The street closing request and letter explaining the event are available to you in your agenda packets, and the police, fire, and EMS departments have been notified of the closure request and have found no safety concerns. There are no financial considerations involved with this request, and the administration recommends that the City Council approve the temporary closing of Court Street from Kidder Street north to the alleyway on Saturday, February 24th, 2018, from 11 a.m. to 6 o'clock p.m. for the Polar Plunge event.
Thank you, Addison. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to comment on this? Seeing none, turn it to the council. A motion and a second to approve the street closure request for Polar Plunge. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Thanks, Addison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, council.
Item B, agreement with Banner for boiler project at the wastewater plant. And Shane, please.
Thank you. Late in 2012, we began experiencing some issues with our boiler located in the digester building down at the wastewater treatment facility. That boiler is a key component in the treatment process as well as the main heat source for multiple buildings on that site, on the wastewater site. In 2013, the city entered into an engineering agreement with Banner and Associates for the addition of a backup boiler, and in 2014, a natural gas burning backup boiler was installed as process boiler phase 1. Phase 2 of that project is to replace the dual fuel boiler and the heat exchanger that were existing. The engineering agreement for phase 2 has been broken down into 5 phases. The phases are the preliminary design and the final design. We've got a bidding phase and a construction observation and administration phase. If approved, the schedule for the project will begin immediately with the final design looking at March of 2018. The project will be advertised and bids will be received and opened in May. Construction will also begin in May with the final construction being completed in December of 2018. This agreement has been reviewed by the city attorney. The agreement, the 5 phases, a cost is associated with each phase. The preliminary design is $30,600. The final design is $36,640. Bidding phase is $6,040. Construction administration is $31,980. Construction observation would be $21,530 for a total cost of $126,790. This has been budgeted for, as well as an estimated cost for the construction cost of $550,000. Administration recommends approval of the agreement with Banner to proceed with the project. If you guys have any questions for me, or a representative from Banner is in the audience.
Just let me understand, the 550 is separate from the 126?
Yes, sir. Yes. Yep.
Thank you. Is there anyone in the audience that has a comment or question on this? Seeing none, council? A motion and a second to approve the engineering agreement with Banner Associates for Vermillion's wastewater treatment facility process boiler phase 2. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Item C, work order for design of proposed shared use path repair options. Jose, please. Oh, there he is, sneaking around.
Currently, portions of the shared use path between 12th Street and the west end of the Vermillion River Bike Hike Trail have fallen into the river. Because of the missing portion of or dangerous conditions, the trail has been closed since 2012. A section of the trail was reopened in 2014 after it was reconstructed further away from the Vermillion River. This work, under this work order with Banner, would be hiring Banner essentially to complete any easement exhibits necessary for the project. In addition to that, the work order would also cover the cost of the completing the construction documents for the construction of the repairs along the river. Banner would be utilizing the survey information they collected on a previous work order. The work to be covered by the work order is described in detail in the attached scope of the services provided by the DOT. The scope of services also sets August 1st, 2018 as a deadline for the project to be submitted to the DOT for final review. The costs associated with the work order will be paid by the DOT through the federal grant received by the city in 2006. The cost for this work order will be $14,291.92. Administration recommends that the City Council approve and sign the work order for the design of the shared use path along the Vermillion River.
Thank you, Jose. Council? A motion and a second to approve the work order for design for proposed shared use path repair options. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Thanks. Item D, declaring Joint Powers Recycling Department skid steer loader surplus. Jose, please.
Thank you. Staff is asking the City Council to declare the existing 2013 skid steer loader to be replaced as surplus so that it may be sold in the future. Staff would like the City Council to declare the skid loader surplus by the Surplus Property Appraisal Committee. Staff recommends appraising the skid steer loader at $18,000. Staff will later trade in the old skid steer during the purchase of the new 2018 Bobcat skid steer loader for the Joint Powers Recycling Department. Siouxland Bobcat of Sioux City, Iowa has offered $16,496 for the 2013 Bobcat skid steer loader. Sale proceeds from the equipment will be used as trade-in value on the purchase of the 2018 skid steer loader. Administration recommends declaring the skid steer loader as surplus and moving forward with appraisal by the Surplus Property Appraisal Committee.
Skid steer loader is kind of awkward to say.
It's a little bit. I just said SSL.
Motion and a second to declare a Joint Powers Recycling Department skid steer loader surplus. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Item E, resolution authorizing the purchase of a Joint Powers Recycling Department skid steer loader. Jose.
Thank you. The budget sessions in 2017, the City Council reviewed the equipment purchases for the Joint Powers Recycling Department. At those meetings, as part of the 2018 equipment replacement schedule, a 2013 skid loader was scheduled for replacement. Administration would like to take advantage of a NJPA bid that was awarded to Bobcat. The total bid for a 2018 S595 T4 Bobcat skid steer loader meeting our specifications is $57,808. Siouxland Bobcat from Sioux City, Iowa will honor the NJPA price and offers additional dealer discounts during bringing the price down to $37,296. Additionally, Siouxland Bobcat has offered to accept our 2013 skid steer loader as trade-in. They would offer $16,496. Allowing the existing equipment to be included as trade would further lower the price of the city to $20,800. The 2018 budget for Joint Powers Recycling included a budget of $53,000 for the purchase of equipment. That equipment was a skid loader and recycling trailer. Staff estimated that the new skid loader would cost roughly $30,000. By going with the Siouxland Bobcat offer, the city would save $9,200 of the budgeted amount. This cost savings would remain in the fund and be used for purchase of other equipment. Administration recommends approving the resolution authorizing the purchase of a 2018 S595 T4 Bobcat skid steer loader for $20,800 from Siouxland Bobcat from Sioux City.
Council? Motion to second to approve resolution authorizing the purchase of a Joint Powers Recycling Department skid steer loader. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Turning to bid openings, item A, Prentice Park and Rotary Park playground equipment. Again, Jose.
Thank you. As part of the improvements to city parks, the City Council budgeted funds to make improvements to the playground equipment at Prentice Park and Rotary Park. The city opened bids on January 11th for playground equipment. The bids for the playground equipment consisted of concrete curbing, playground surfacing, and other miscellaneous items. The bid documents asked for the bid for a base bid that would cover all the playground equipment and all the additional items. Additionally, contractors were asked to provide the city with a bid on a shelter. This was the bid alternate. The documents allowed the city to choose a base bid by itself or a base bid with the shelter, the bid alternate. Bid specifications were sent to 5 potential bidders in the area. The city received 1 bid out of those 5. The only bid was provided by from Crouch Recreation of Omaha. The base bid was for $107,711, while the base bid on the bid alternate was for $118,067. The improvements at the parks will be paid through the city's second penny funds and from donations. The donations will be coming from the Vermillion Rotary Club and Sestack Foundation. Administration recommends awarding the base bid to Crouch Recreation of Omaha for $100,000, $711, for the purchase and installation of the playground equipment at Prentice Park and at Rotary Park. Staff does not recommend accepting the bid alternate at this time due to cost.
Thank you, Jose. Council? Tom?
Quick question, if you don't mind. $605 for a trash can? And can you tell us, enlighten us?
About what?
$605 for a trash can? Why? Tell us about it. It must be really special.
That's it's this bid for the trash can, so I mean, there could be other costs associated with it as far as its mobilization, insurance, whatever the case might be. We don't necessarily go out and compare the price for the trash can necessarily. We mainly just look at the price for the entire bid, and the bid actually was actually within the range that we were estimating. So.
John, did you have?
Other than that, you don't have any details.
No, it's I know the brand name of it, but other than that, no, I don't have any details.
Thanks.
Yep.
John has a comment.
Just for background, you'll walk past one tonight as you exit the building. That is probably about $575. As you walk out the building, those metal ones that we have in the downtown area, those run about $575 for those. So, yeah.
Further comments or questions? Thank you. We don't have a thing yet, do we? A motion and a second to approve the Prentice Park and Rotary Park playground equipment. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Turns us to item 10, John, City Manager's report.
Thank you. The next City Council meeting on February 5th, we do have a public hearing on an ordinance to count garage parking stalls that are at least 10 by 20 and within 10 feet of the residential structure as part of the parking to meet required off-street parking requirements. That's one of our public hearings next time. The Planning Commission does have a special meeting on Monday, the 29th of this month at 5:30. They'll be meeting jointly with the Clay County Planning Commission to consider a conditional use permit for a house to be located in the joint jurisdictional area. On Wednesday, the 17th of January, coming up here in 2 days at 5:30, there's a Jefferson Street reconstruction meeting here in the City Council chambers. That's a major construction project the city has for this 2018 season. Jefferson Street will be reconstructed from Clark Street north to Duke Street. And just, we invited the neighbors to let them know and to hear the plan, et cetera. But it is a public meeting on Wednesday, the 17th at 5:30 in the Jefferson Street reconstruction. The following week, on the 24th of January, Wednesday, January 24th at 5:30, there's also another public meeting. This is on revisions to our access management portion of the subdivision ordinance, and this meeting will also take place in the City Council chambers. And if you'd like to donate blood, we're not going to suggest the site, but the police and the fire department annually have a friendly competition on this blood drive. The Heroes Behind the Badge blood drive is next Monday, the 22nd of January, and that is from 10 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. at Sanford Vermillion.
Any comments or questions for our City Manager?
Just to add to that, if someone can't make it to donate, they can have someone do it for them and designate it to either department.
Can I have you do that for me? Because I can't give blood.
Well, I guess they could count me twice. I could give 2 pints, I suppose.
Any other comments or questions for John? Seeing none, then we'll talk to Stump Mike with invoices payable. Do you have any questions on any invoice item that you'd like Mike to explain?
Second.
Motion is second to pay our bills. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. We have no consensus agenda, so Steve? Motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries.